Get out of here, you useless old hag. As far as I'm concerned, you'll never set foot in this house again. Get out of my house now!" Amanda Brooks screamed, her face contorted with rage. I remained calm, looked directly into her eyes, and responded, "Try to make me leave!" She lunged at me furiously, but my son Daniel grabbed her arms before she could assault me. I tried to call the police, but Amanda slapped the phone from my hand, sending it flying across the room. "You're not calling the police. You're just leaving," she yelled. I walked out of the house, humiliated but determined. That young woman had no idea that the house where she lived with my son was in fact my property. And I already knew exactly who she really was. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. My name is Evelyn Parker. I'm 72 years old, and my son Daniel never really grew up. Without his father's presence, who passed away when Daniel was young, he became emotionally dependent on me. At 35, he had tried various businesses that failed miserably and put me in several financial predicaments. I always overlooked his failures, thinking perhaps he just needed time. During his last financial crisis, when he was about to be evicted, I decided to let him live in one of my houses, a property I was renting out that represented an important part of my monthly income. I asked the tenants to vacate the property and handed the keys to my son without revealing that the house was legally in my name. We also maintained a joint bank account containing part of the life insurance money left by his father, our safety net for emergencies. My shoulders slumped as I drove away from the house, tears streaming down my face. The image of Amanda's smug expression burned in my mind. My own son had stood there saying nothing, while this woman, this stranger, had humiliated me in what was actually my own home. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. But beneath the hurt, a flame of determination began to grow. I wasn't some fragile old lady who would just roll over and accept this treatment. I had survived the death of my husband, raised a son alone, and managed my finances carefully enough to own multiple properties. This girl had no idea who she was dealing with. At home, I collapsed onto my sofa, feeling the weight of the day crushing down on me. For 2 years, Daniel had lived in that house without major changes in his behavior or ambitions. Then suddenly, I received an extremely excited call from him. "Mom, I need you to meet someone very special." I had been hopeful, but cautious. At the restaurant, I barely recognized my own son. Well-dressed, clean-shaven, with a haircut, smiling and confident. A surprising transformation. Amanda Brooks was stunning and charismatic, but something about her bothered me from the first moment. During the conversation, I had the strong feeling I'd seen that face somewhere before. "Don't I know you from somewhere?" I asked, noticing a brief moment of tension in her eyes. She quickly changed the subject, explaining that she had worked as a model in some television commercials. The dinner went well, but I left with a strange uneasiness. In the weeks that followed, I observed worrying changes. Daniel sold his old car, which was a sentimental inheritance from his father. When questioned, he explained he was investing in online businesses with Amanda, supposedly a digital startup specialist. The memory of that first dinner made my stomach churn. I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning, but it wasn't too late. I got up from the sofa, my back straightening with resolve. Amanda had no idea what was coming. The morning after Amanda threw me out, I marched into my bank with determination I hadn't felt in years. The young clerk's eyes widened as I slammed my ID on the counter. "I need to close a joint account immediately," I said, my voice steady despite the rage simmering inside me. "And I need to speak with the mortgage department." 2 hours later, I walked out with the joint account closed and transferred to a new account solely in my name. I had also initiated the formal eviction process for my property. My son and his precious Amanda would soon discover what happens when you mess with Evelyn Parker. My phone rang incessantly that afternoon, Daniel calling 19 times in a row. I let it ring. For once, he would wait for me. When I finally answered on the 20th call, his voice was frantic. "Mom, what did you do? The bank says our account is empty." "Not empty, Daniel. Transferred." My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Cool and confident. "That money was partly my retirement fund, not a playground for your girlfriend's investments. You can't do this," he shouted, panic edging his voice. "We have bills due. Amanda's startup needs Amanda's startup," I interrupted. "Doesn't exist. And as for what I can and can't do, you'll find the eviction notice pinned to my front door tomorrow morning." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice had shrunk to a whisper. "Eviction. But this is our home." "No, Daniel. It's my property legally and fully. I never transferred the deed to you." My heart ached at the shock in his voice, but I continued. "You have 28 days to find a new place to live." Amanda's shrill voice cut through the background. "Let me talk to her." There was a scuffling sound, and then her venomous tone filled my ear. "You spiteful old witch! You can't I just did." I cut her off. "And Amanda, I've seen your face before. I'm remembering where and when I do. You'll wish you'd never set foot in my house." I hung up my hand, trembling, but my resolve firm. That night, I barely slept. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and began searching. Amanda's face had triggered something in my memory. A news article, perhaps, or a warning shared by friends. I couldn't place it yet, but I knew it was important. The next morning, Daniel appeared at my doorstep, his face haggard. "Mom, please," he begged. "You can't do this to us." Amanda is devastated. I invited him in, but stayed standing, maintaining the physical higher ground. "I'm not doing anything to you, Daniel. I'm protecting what's mine, what's ours. The money your father left was for our security, not for Amanda's schemes. Her business ideas are legitimate," he insisted, but doubt had crept into his voice. "Are they?" I asked quietly. "Then why did the bank alert me to unusual activity, multiple large withdrawals to offshore accounts?" "Tell me, son, have you seen any business plans? Met any of her partners, seen any products?" His silence was my answer. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "She loves me," he finally said, but the words sounded hollow. "Does she love you, or what she thinks you have?" I asked, my voice gentler now. "Think, Daniel. How did she react when she learned the money was gone? Was she concerned about you, or about the cash?" He left without answering, shoulders slumped in a posture I knew too well. The same defeated stance he'd adopted after each business failure. But this time, I wouldn't rescue him immediately. Sometimes people need to feel the consequences of their choices before they can grow. Back at my computer, I continued my search with renewed determination. Amanda's face haunted me, and I knew I had seen it before. Somewhere important, somewhere that would explain everything. On the 4th day of my investigation, I found it. The memory that had been nagging at me suddenly crystallized as I scrolled through a local news archive. There she was, Amanda Brooks. Except in the article she was identified as Melissa Carter. The headline read, "Local man loses life savings to romance scammer." My hands shook as I clicked on the article. The story was painfully familiar. Melissa had targeted a vulnerable man in his 40s, isolated him from family, convinced him to invest in non-existent business ventures, and vanished once his accounts were empty. The article included warnings from police about a string of similar cases across 5 states. "I knew it," I whispered, printing the article along with several others I found featuring the same woman under different names. I arranged them carefully in a folder, adding bank statements showing the suspicious withdrawals from the joint account. When I tried to call Daniel, my calls went straight to voicemail. I drove to my house, the one where they were living, only to find the curtains drawn and no one answering the door. My neighbor, Mrs. Gardner, approached me as I was about to leave. "They cleared out last night," she said, concern etching her kind face. "Packed up a van around midnight. I thought you should know. Your son looked terrible. Evelyn like he hadn't slept in days." My heart sank. "Did you see which way they went? Or hear anything about where they might be headed?" Mrs. Gardner shook her head. "Nothing specific, but the woman Amanda was on the phone arguing with someone about flight times. They were running, or rather, Amanda was running, taking my emotionally vulnerable son with her." I thanked Mrs. Gardner and drove straight to the police station. Officer Bennett listened patiently as I presented my evidence. The news articles identifying Amanda as a known scammer. The bank statements, the property deed showing I owned the house. I explained how she had isolated my son and was now potentially fleeing with whatever assets she'd managed to extract from him. "She's done this before," I insisted, pushing the news articles toward him. "She targets vulnerable men, drains them financially, then disappears. My son is in danger, not physically perhaps, but certainly emotionally and financially." Officer Bennett nodded, reviewing the documents. "You've done excellent detective work, Mrs. Parker. We can file a fraud report and put out an alert for both of them. But you should know your son is an adult if he's willingly traveling with her." "He doesn't know who she really is." I interrupted, my voice cracking for the first time. "Please, he's all I have." Something in my expression must have reached him. "I'll expedite this," he promised. "And I'll contact the fraud division immediately. They have resources for tracking these kinds of scammers." As I left the station, my phone rang an unknown number. I answered hesitantly. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was barely audible. "I need help." My legs nearly gave out with relief. "Where are you? Are you safe? Airport hotel?" He mumbled. "She's gone. Mom took my wallet, my ID, everything. Said she was getting coffee and never came back." I gripped the phone tighter, torn between vindication and heartbreak for my son. "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." "Which airport? International. Terminal B. Airport Hotel." His voice broke. "You were right about her. I should have listened." "We'll talk about that later," I said firmly. "Just stay put." In the car, I called Officer Bennett to update him, then focused on the road ahead. My son needed me, and despite everything, I would be there for him. But this time, things would be different. This time, there would be boundaries. What Amanda hadn't counted on was that she hadn't just scammed a naive man. She'd crossed a mother who would stop at nothing to protect her child and everything she'd worked for. The airport hotel lobby was crowded with travelers, but I spotted Daniel immediately hunched in a corner chair. He looked smaller, somehow diminished. His eyes were red-rimmed, his clothes rumpled. When he saw me, his face crumpled like a child's. I didn't rush to embrace him. Instead, I sat in the chair opposite his and waited. She took everything he finally said, staring at his hands. "The emergency cash you always told me to keep in my sock drawer. Dad's watch." She even had me withdraw the maximum from my credit cards yesterday, saying we needed cash for a business opportunity that couldn't wait. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the anger boiling inside me. "And now you understand who she really is." Daniel looked up, his eyes swimming with tears. "How did you know, Mom? How did you see through her when I couldn't?" Because I wasn't blinded by what I wanted to see, I said simply. Now we need to report your stolen ID and cancel those credit cards immediately. For the next 4 hours, we worked filing police reports, calling credit card companies, placing fraud alerts on his accounts. With each call, Daniel's shoulders straightened a little more, as if shedding the weight of his denial. Officer Bennett met us at the police station, bringing the fraud division detective assigned to the case. Detective Ortiz listened intently as Daniel described Amanda's manipulation tactics, how she'd isolated him from friends and family, how she'd pressured him to invest in various schemes. She's got it down to a science, Detective Ortiz said grimly. You're not her first victim, Mr. Watson, and you won't be her last unless we catch her. The good news is, your mother's evidence gives us a solid foundation, and your testimony adds crucial details about her current appearance tactics and possible destinations. As Daniel signed his statement, I stepped outside for air. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face, a small comfort amid the chaos. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Gardner. Mrs. Gardner. Maintenance man checked house. Some damage inside, mostly bedroom and living room. Another mess to clean up, but at least my son was safe, and my house was still mine. When Daniel joined me outside, something had changed in his demeanor. His back was straighter, his gaze more direct. I want to help catch her, he said firmly. Not just for me, but for whoever she might target next. Pride swelled in my chest, but I tempered it with caution. That's commendable, Daniel. But your first priority needs to be rebuilding your own life. I know, he nodded. And I know I can't stay with you. I need to stand on my own feet for once. The words I'd waited decades to hear. I allowed myself a small smile. There's a studio apartment above Mrs. Gardner's garage. It's not much, but it's a start. I'll take it, he said without hesitation. And Mom, I'm sorry. Not just about Amanda, but about everything. All the years of depending on you taking advantage. I touched his arm lightly. We'll have time for all that. Right now, let's focus on making sure Amanda doesn't do this to anyone else. As we drove back to my home, Daniel stared thoughtfully out the window. You know what's ironic? He finally said. She always mocked your outdated ways, how you kept paper bank statements, how you clipped news articles, how you remembered faces. In the end, that's what caught her. I couldn't help but smile. Never underestimate an old woman with a good memory. Daniel, we've seen too much to be easily fooled. For the first time in days, he laughed. A genuine sound that washed away some of the tension between us. Amanda had taken much from him, but perhaps in the process, she'd given him something valuable, a chance to finally grow up. 8 weeks after Amanda's disappearance, Detective Ortiz called with news. We've got her. Mrs. Parker Melissa Carter, or Amanda Brooks as your son knew her, was arrested in Las Vegas, Nevada, attempting to open bank accounts with stolen identification. Relief flooded through me. Will Daniel need to testify eventually? Yes, her pattern of fraud crosses state lines, so federal charges are likely. Your son's case will be one of several the prosecutor will present. I thanked him and immediately called Daniel at his new job, a modest position at a local bookstore that paid enough to cover his rent for Mrs. Gardner's studio apartment. They caught her, I said when he answered. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. I should feel happy, he finally replied. But mostly, I just feel stupid. You were manipulated by a professional con artist, Daniel. She's done this multiple times. Still, he sighed. I let her come between us. I believed her when she said you were controlling me, holding me back. I even believed her when she said you doctored those news articles. I swallowed hard, remembering the accusations he'd hurled at me before Amanda's true nature was revealed. What matters is that you see the truth now. After work, Daniel came over for dinner, our new weekly tradition. As we ate, I noticed subtle changes in him. How he maintained eye contact during conversation. How he asked questions about my life instead of talking only about his problems. How he insisted on washing dishes afterward. "I've been thinking," he said as he dried a plate. "I want to meet her other victims." The plate nearly slipped from my hands. "Why would you want to do that? Because I'm not the only one rebuilding a life she destroyed. Maybe we could help each other." His expression was earnest, determined. Detective Ortiz said, "There's a support group, people who've been scammed not just by Amanda, but by others like her." I studied my son's face, seeing something new there, empathy perhaps, or a desire to transform his pain into purpose. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Would you come with me?" Just the first time the request surprised me. For years, I'd been pushing myself into his life, offering unsolicited help and advice. Now he was asking for my support. Of course I will. The following Tuesday, we sat in a city community center meeting room with 10 other people, men and women of various ages, all victims of romance scams. As each person shared their story, I watched Daniel's face saw recognition and relief as he realized he wasn't alone in his experience. When his turn came, he spoke clearly and honestly about his vulnerabilities, how Amanda had exploited them, and what he was learning about himself in the aftermath. The hardest part, he admitted, was accepting that my mother had been right all along. She saw through Amanda immediately, but I was too stubborn to listen. An older man across the circle nodded knowingly. My daughter tried to warn me too. Took me losing my retirement fund to finally hear her. After the meeting, Daniel was quiet on the drive home. When we pulled into his driveway, he turned to me with an intensity I hadn't seen before. "I'm going to testify against Amanda," he said firmly. "And I'm going to keep attending those meetings. I think this might be the first truly important thing I've ever done." My heart swelled with a new kind of pride, not the anxious hope I'd felt during his many failed ventures, but genuine admiration for his courage and growth. "Daniel," I said carefully, "I've always believed you had it in you to do something meaningful with your life. I'm just sorry it took this experience to bring it out." He shook his head. "Don't be sorry, Mom. For the first time, I'm not sorry either. Amanda thought she was destroying me, but instead, she might have saved me from myself." As I watched him walk to his apartment, head high, shoulders squared, I realized Amanda had underestimated both of us. She had seen an easily manipulated man and his interfering mother. She hadn't recognized a fighter who just needed the right battle or the woman who had raised him to eventually find his strength. 6 weeks after Amanda's arrest, Daniel and I sat in a federal prosecutor's office in downtown Las Vegas. Ms. Shaw, the assistant U.S. attorney handling the case, spread photographs across her desk. Different women, all with Amanda's face, but various hairstyles, colors, and names. "We've linked her to 9 separate scams in 5 states, Ms. Shaw explained. "What makes your case particularly valuable, Mr. Watson, is that your mother preserved evidence so meticulously." Daniel glanced at me with newfound respect. "She's always been thorough." "Thorough is an understatement." Ms. Shaw smiled. "The bank statements, the news articles, the property documentation. It's a prosecutor's dream." Pride straightened my spine. For years, Daniel had mocked my obsessive organization, my filing cabinets of important papers, my insistence on keeping records. Now those same habits were helping bring a criminal to justice. "There's something else," Ms. Shaw continued, her expression turning serious. "We found evidence that Amanda Melissa was planning something bigger with you, Daniel. Notes in her hotel room suggested she was pushing for marriage." Daniel paled. She had been hinting about it recently. Said we should do it quickly, elope somewhere romantic. Once married, she could have legally accessed far more of your assets and potentially your mother's as well, Ms. Shaw explained. She was playing a longer game with you than with her previous victims. The thought sent chills down my spine. How close had we come to disaster if I hadn't recognized her, if I hadn't acted quickly? When is the trial? I asked, pushing away the dark thoughts. That's the other reason I called you in, Ms. Shaw replied. Melissa's attorney has approached us about a plea deal. She'll plead guilty to multiple fraud charges and reveal information about a larger network of scammers she's connected with in exchange for a somewhat reduced sentence. Daniel leaned forward. What does that mean for us? It means no trial. You'd still provide victim impact statements for the sentencing hearing, but you wouldn't have to testify about every detail in open court. Daniel and I exchanged glances. The relief on his face was palpable. I'll do whatever helps put her away, he said firmly. But I admit not having to face her in a lengthy trial would be easier. As we left the prosecutor's office, Daniel suggested we walk through the nearby city park rather than heading straight to the car. It was a beautiful autumn day, the trees ablaze with color. For several minutes, we strolled in comfortable silence. You know what I realized in there, Daniel finally said. If you hadn't been so, we might have lost everything. Your attention to detail, your insistence on keeping records, your stubbornness, all the things that sometimes drove me crazy, they saved us. I laughed softly. Well, being underestimated has its advantages. Amanda saw an interfering old woman. She never considered I might be a formidable opponent. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face me. I underestimated you too, Mom. For years, I saw your help as meddling or control. I never recognized it as strength. The words warmed me more than the autumn sun. We both made mistakes, Daniel. I probably did enable your dependence for too long. He nodded thoughtfully. The support group has helped me see that. How sometimes love can look like helping, but actually hurt in the long run. We continued walking, and Daniel pointed to a bench overlooking a small pond. Let's sit for a minute. As we watched ducks glide across the water, Daniel cleared his throat. I've been thinking about Dad's insurance money. What's left of it? My chest tightened. Was he going to ask for more financial help even now? I want you to use it for yourself. He continued, surprising me. Travel, hobbies, whatever you've put off while helping me all these years. I'm on my feet now, Mom. Really? Tears pricked my eyes and I blinked them away. That's generous of you, Daniel. It's not generosity, it's just finally right. He squeezed my hand. Amanda thought she was destroying us. Instead, she forced us to rebuild something better, looking at my son's profile so like his father's. But now, with the maturity I'd waited decades to see, I realized he was right. From the ashes of Amanda's deception, something unexpected had emerged. The relationship we should have had all along. The day of Melissa Carter's sentencing hearing arrived with a crisp December chill. Daniel and I dressed carefully, me in a tailored navy suit I'd purchased specifically for this occasion. Daniel in a charcoal gray ensemble that made him look older, more substantial. You look powerful, Mom, he commented as we pulled into the courthouse parking lot. I smoothed my jacket, feeling the unfamiliar confidence of someone who had faced a threat and emerged victorious. I feel powerful, I admitted. The courtroom was more crowded than I'd expected. Ms. Shaw had told us that several of Melissa's other victims would be present, but I hadn't anticipated the media attention. Apparently, the case had touched a nerve. Elder fraud and romance scams were increasing problems, and our story had resonated with the public. We took our seats in the front row. Ms. Shaw nodded reassuringly from her table, then returned to reviewing her notes. The bailiff called for us to rise as the judge entered, and the proceedings began with formal introductions and case summaries. And then she was there. Melissa Carter, escorted by court officers. She looked smaller, somehow. less glamorous in her navy jumpsuit, her previously immaculate hair now pulled back in a simple ponytail. For a brief moment, our eyes met across the courtroom. I didn't look away. I wanted her to see me clearly, to recognize the woman she had so gravely underestimated. The judge reviewed the plea agreement, then invited victim impact statements. An elderly man spoke first, his voice wavering as he described how Melissa had stripped him of his retirement savings and his dignity. A middle-aged woman followed, explaining how the scam had left her not only financially devastated but unable to trust again. When Daniel's turn came, he walked to the podium with steady steps. His voice, once uncertain, now rang clear in the hushed courtroom. Melissa Carter didn't just steal my money, he began. She tried to steal my relationship with my mother, my self-respect, and my future. She isolated me from the one person who truly had my best interests at heart, convincing me that my mother's concern was control, that her wisdom was interference. I watched Melissa's face as my son spoke. For the first time, her composed mask slipped, revealing a flicker of genuine emotion, surprised, perhaps, at the strength in Daniel's voice. "But here's what she didn't count on," Daniel continued. "She didn't expect that my mother would fight for me. She didn't expect that the woman she dismissed as a meddling old lady would be the one to expose her. And she certainly didn't expect that her actions would ultimately make me stronger, more independent, and more appreciative of genuine love than I've ever been." Pride swelled in my chest as Daniel concluded his statement by addressing Melissa directly. "You thought you were destroying me, but you actually set me free. Free from dependency, free from immaturity, free to finally become the man my mother always knew I could be." As Daniel returned to his seat beside me, I squeezed his hand. Ms. Shaw nodded, indicating it was my turn. I approached the podium standing tall despite my 73 years. "Your Honor," I began, "I come before you not just as Daniel Watson's mother, but as a woman who has lived long enough to recognize predators like Melissa Carter. She selected my son because she saw vulnerability. She targeted our family because she believed we would be easy victims." I paused, making deliberate eye contact with Melissa. Her mistake was thinking that age diminishes us, that a 73-year-old woman wouldn't have the strength, the resources, or the determination to fight back. She underestimated not only a mother's love, but a lifetime of hard-won wisdom. The courtroom remained silent as I continued. "I don't want vengeance, Your Honor. What I want is protection for other families, other sons and daughters, other mothers and fathers who might fall prey to someone like Melissa Carter. I want accountability that matches the calculated nature of her crimes." When I finished and returned to my seat, Daniel leaned over. "That was incredible, Mom," he whispered. "You didn't even mention how she humiliated you that day in the house." "Some victories don't need to be spoken aloud," I replied softly. "She knows what she did, and she knows who won." The judge sentenced Melissa to 8 years in federal prison plus restitution to all her victims. As the courtroom began to clear, Melissa was led past our row in handcuffs. She paused briefly, her eyes meeting mine once more. "You were right about the house," she said quietly, a hint of her old defiance showing through. "But I almost had him completely." I stood to face her directly, no longer the humiliated woman who had left my house that day. "Almost doesn't count, Amanda," I replied deliberately, using her false name. "And he was never yours to have." The officers led her away, and Daniel and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright winter sunlight, both standing straighter than we had in years. Spring arrived with a burst of renewal. The plea deal had spared us a lengthy trial, allowing both Daniel and me to focus on rebuilding our lives. In the 4 months since Melissa's sentencing, remarkable changes had blossomed. Daniel continued working at the bookstore, but had recently been promoted to assistant manager. His apartment above Mrs. Gardner's garage, once a temporary refuge, was now a cozy home decorated with second-hand treasures and bookshelves he'd built himself. Most importantly, he was attending community college night classes in accounting a practical skill he discovered an aptitude for while organizing the bookstore's financial records. As for me, I had followed Daniel's advice and used some of the remaining insurance money for myself. I joined a local senior hiking group, taken a watercolor class, and even planned a summer trip to the Gulf Coast, something I'd dreamed of for years, but always postponed. Today, however, was significant for a different reason. Daniel and I stood on the front lawn of my rental property, the house where he and Melissa had lived. The scene of my humiliation and eventual triumph. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Daniel asked, watching the real estate agent hammer the for sale sign into the soft spring earth. I nodded confidently. "Absolutely. This house has served its purpose in our lives. It's time for a fresh start." The property had stood vacant since Melissa's departure. Despite professional cleaning, I couldn't bring myself to rent it again. Too many negative memories lingered in those rooms. Selling it would not only purge those memories, but would provide funds for Daniel's education and my own future security. Mrs. Parker, the real estate agent, approached with clipboard in hand. "I've scheduled the first open house for this weekend. Given the neighborhood and the market, I expect significant interest." I signed the necessary paperwork, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders with each signature. This house, once a source of income, then a source of conflict, now a reminder of painful times, would soon belong to someone else. A family who would create new, happier memories within its walls. As we drove away, Daniel glanced back at the property. "It's strange. For a while, that place felt like everything I'd ever wanted. My own home, a beautiful girlfriend, independence from you." He smiled apologetically. "Now I can see it was all an illusion." "Not all of it," I corrected him. "Your desire for independence was real and healthy. It was just built on a false foundation." We continued to my house, our usual Saturday destination for the past few months. Daniel had instituted a tradition of cooking dinner for me once a week, his culinary skills improving with each attempt. Tonight's menu was his most ambitious, yet a roast with vegetables and homemade bread. As he worked in the kitchen, confident, focused, occasionally consulting a recipe, but mostly relying on his growing intuition, I marveled at the transformation. This was not the same man who had allowed Melissa to berate his mother and throw her out of a house that wasn't even theirs. This was someone new, or perhaps someone who had been there all along, buried beneath layers of dependency and immaturity. "You're staring, Mom," Daniel noted without looking up from the vegetables he was chopping. "Just admiring the view," I replied with a smile. "It's not every day a mother gets to see her son flourish before her eyes." He set down his knife and turned to face me. "I've been thinking a lot about that day when Amanda threw you out. I keep wondering why I didn't stop her, why I just stood there." The pain in his eyes was evident, and I resisted the urge to dismiss his concerns with platitudes. "Why do you think you didn't?" I asked instead. Daniel leaned against the counter, considering the question seriously. I think I was terrified of losing her. She had convinced me that she was my one chance at happiness, at being a real man, and I believed that meant separating from you, proving I didn't need my mother anymore." He shook his head ruefully. "What I didn't understand was that real independence doesn't mean cutting people off. It means building healthy relationships from a place of strength, not dependency." His insight took my breath away. "That's remarkably self-aware, Daniel." He smiled slightly. "Well, therapy helps. So does that support group." He returned to his chopping. One of the guys there said something that stuck with me. "True strength isn't shown by who you push away, but by who you're strong enough to keep close." I blinked back unexpected tears, touched by his growth. and the implications for our relationship. We were building something new, a mother-son bond based on mutual respect rather than dependency and enabling. As we sat down to dinner later, the roast perfectly cooked and the bread still warm, Daniel raised his glass in a toast. "To fresh starts," he said, "and to the strongest woman I know, who never gave up on me even when I gave up on her." I clinked my glass against his, my heart full. "To fresh starts," I echoed. "And to the man you've become." 1 year after Amanda's dramatic exit from our lives, I sat in the audience of the community college auditorium, watching with undisguised pride as Daniel walked across the stage to receive his accounting certificate. At 37, he was older than most of his classmates, but his face shone with an accomplishment that had been earned entirely through his own efforts. "Daniel Watson's certificate in accounting with honors," the dean announced, and I found myself on my feet applauding with an enthusiasm that made Daniel shake his head in mock embarrassment. After the ceremony, we gathered with a small group, Mrs. Gardner, Daniel's boss from the bookstore, and 2 friends from his support group for a celebration dinner at a local restaurant. I had offered to host at my home, but Daniel had insisted on treating everyone. "Mom," he said, raising his glass once everyone was served, "I know I'm supposed to thank the Academy and all that, but really, I need to thank you. Not just for your support this past year, but for fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself." "Here, here," said Mrs. Gardner, raising her glass. "Helen is a force to be reckoned with." As dinner progressed, I noticed Daniel checking his watch several times. "Are we keeping you from something?" I asked quietly when the others were engaged in conversation. "Actually," he said with an enigmatic smile, "there's somewhere I'd like to take you after dinner, if you're up for a little surprise." Intrigued, I agreed. After we'd said our goodbyes to the others, Daniel drove us through familiar neighborhoods until we turned onto the street where my rental property, now sold, was located. "Daniel," I questioned as he parked across the street from the house, "why are we here?" "Just wait," he said, checking his watch again. "Perfect timing." As we sat in the car, a moving truck pulled up to the house. A young couple emerged from inside, followed by 2 small children who raced around the front yard with the boundless energy of youth. The new owners of my former property were clearly in the process of moving in. "I don't understand," I said, turning to Daniel. His expression was thoughtful as he watched the family. "I looked them up after you mentioned the house had sold. He's a firefighter. She's a nurse. Those kids are 5 and 7. He turned to me. "They're a real family, Mom. A good family, and they're going to fill that house with love and laughter and memories that will completely erase what happened there with Amanda." Tears pricked my eyes as I understood what this moment meant to him. "You're giving the house a fresh start in your mind." He nodded. Our story with Amanda could have ended so differently. She could have taken everything. The house, the money, maybe even destroyed our relationship permanently. Instead, look at all that's grown from that awful day. I watched as the father swept one of the children up onto his shoulders, the child's delighted shriek carrying across the street. "They seem happy," I observed. "They are," Daniel confirmed. "And so are we, aren't we?" Despite everything, or maybe because of it, we sat in companionable silence for a few minutes more, watching the new family begin their life in the house that had once been the setting for our darkest moments. There was something profoundly healing about witnessing this transition from a place of pain to a place of new beginnings. As Daniel drove us home, he seemed to have one more surprise in mind. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket at a stoplight. He pulled out a small velvet box. "Daniel, what?" "Open it," he encouraged. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm. A small house. "I had it custom made," he explained, to remind us both that a house is just a building. It's the people inside who make it a home. The sentiment touched me deeply. It's beautiful, I said, letting him fasten it around my wrist. There's one more thing, he said as we pulled into my driveway. I've been offered a full-time position at an accounting firm. It's entry-level, but with my certificate and the partner's recommendation from the bookstore accounts I've been handling, they're taking a chance on me. Daniel, that's wonderful news, I exclaimed. It means I'll finally be completely financially independent, he continued. No more help needed. And he hesitated. I found an apartment closer to the firm, a real apartment, not just a room above a garage. I felt a momentary pang at the thought of him moving further away, but it was quickly replaced by genuine happiness for his progress. You've come so far, I said softly. I'm so proud of the man you've become. I'm proud of him too, Daniel replied with a smile. And I have you to thank for never giving up on him even when he was buried under years of immaturity and poor choices. As we walked to my front door, I glanced at the silver bracelet glinting on my wrist. Amanda had tried to throw me out of a house that was legally mine. But in doing so, she had inadvertently helped us build something far more valuable, a relationship that no one could ever take away. 18 months after Amanda's sentencing, I received an unexpected phone call from Ms. Shaw, the prosecutor who had handled her case. Mrs. Parker, she began, I wanted to inform you personally rather than having you hear it elsewhere. Melissa Carter is being transferred to a minimum security facility. Her cooperation with authorities has led to the identification and arrest of several other members of her fraud network. I absorbed this information calmly, surprised by my own lack of anger or anxiety. Thank you for letting me know. Is there anything we need to do? No, nothing at all. She still has years left on her sentence, and the restraining order remains in effect permanently. I simply thought you deserved to know given how instrumental your evidence was in the case. After hanging up, I called Daniel at his office to relay the news. How do you feel about it? He asked. Oddly at peace, I admitted. She seems very far away from our lives now. She is, Daniel confirmed. In every possible way. That evening, Daniel came over with takeout from our favorite restaurant. A small celebration, he explained, for a milestone in his own life. He had been dating Emily, a quiet, thoughtful librarian he'd met through the bookstore for 6 months now. I've told her everything, he said as we ate. About Amanda, about my financial irresponsibility, about how I let you down. All of it. That must have been difficult, I observed, noting the calm confidence in his demeanor. It was necessary, he corrected. Emily deserves to know who I really am. Not just who I am now, but how I got here. And something amazing happened. Mom, when I finished telling her everything she said, she respected me more for it, not less. I smiled, recognizing the healthy foundation he was building. She sounds like a wise woman. She is, and she wants to meet you properly, not just the quick introductions we've had. She suggested Sunday dinner next week if you're available. I'd like that very much, I agreed. Later, as we cleared the dishes together, a simple domestic task that had somehow become a symbol of our new, more balanced relationship, Daniel grew thoughtful. You know, I've been thinking about what you said that day in court, about how Amanda underestimated you because of your age. He placed a plate in the drying rack. I did the same. I did the same thing in a way. I saw you as just Mom, someone to rebel against or depend on, but never really a person in your own right. The observation touched me. That's a common thing between parents and children. I think we get locked into roles and forget to see each other fully. Well, I see you now, he said simply, and I'm amazed by what I see. You rebuilt your life after Dad died, raised me on your own, managed your properties, and then had the strength to fight for me when I couldn't fight for myself. You're remarkable, Mom. I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the hot dishwater. For so long I had defined myself primarily as Daniel's mother, measuring my success or failure by his well-being. Now at 74, I was being seen, truly seen, for all that I was. You know, I said carefully, when Amanda screamed at me to get out of her house that day, something broke inside me. Not just my heart over your betrayal, but something deeper, my identity. Perhaps I felt insignificant, disposable. Daniel stopped washing, turning to face me fully. I'm so sorry, Mom. No, let me finish. I continued. That moment, as painful as it was, forced me to reclaim myself, to remember that I am more than someone's mother or someone's victim. I am Helen Parker, and I have lived a life of consequence. Daniel's eyes glistened with understanding. You certainly have. And now I'm living a life of choice, I added. My hiking group, my watercolor classes, my trip to the Gulf Coast. These aren't just activities, they're declarations of selfhood. To Helen Parker, Daniel said, raising a soapy hand in mock toast. A woman of consequence and choice. I laughed, flicking water at him playfully. The kitchen, once a place where I had worked alone preparing meals for a son who took them for granted, was now a space of shared joy and mutual appreciation. Later that night, after Daniel had gone home to his new apartment, I sat on my porch watching fireflies dance in the summer dusk. My phone buzzed with a text message, a photo from Daniel showing a small velvet box containing a modest but elegant engagement ring. Not yet, the message read, but soon. Wanted you to be the first to know. I smiled, typing back, my enthusiastic approval. As I set the phone down, I caught sight of the silver bracelet on my wrist, the little house charm catching the last light of day. Amanda had tried to cast me out, thinking she could erase me from my son's life. Instead, she had inadvertently secured my place in it forever. Not as a crutch or an ATM, but as a mother treasured for her strength, wisdom, and unwavering love. 2 years to the day after Amanda screamed at me to get out of her house, I stood in the garden of Daniel and Emily's new home, surrounded by their closest friends and family. At 75, I had never felt more vibrant or more valued. Mom, Daniel called, approaching with Emily on his arm. We wanted to show you something before the other guests arrived. They led me to a secluded corner of the garden where a small stone bench sat beneath a flowering dogwood tree. A discreet plaque on the bench read, "For Helen Parker, who taught us that true strength comes from within." It's our wedding gift to you, Emily explained, her gentle eyes warm with genuine affection. A place that's always yours, in our home. Tears threatened, but I blinked them away, not wanting to smudge my carefully applied makeup. It's perfect, I managed, touching the engraved plaque with reverent fingers. The garden filled gradually with guests for the intimate wedding ceremony. Daniel, handsome in his tailored suit, stood tall and confident, a man fully formed, no longer the boy who had hidden behind my protection or Amanda's manipulation. As the mother of the groom, I had been given a place of honor in the front row. But when the officiant asked, "Who presents this man in marriage?" Daniel surprised everyone with a break from tradition. "I present myself," he answered clearly. Then turning to me with a smile, he added, "With gratitude to my mother, who taught me how to stand on my own." The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity and authenticity. When Daniel and Emily exchanged vows they had written themselves, I heard echoes of the hard-won wisdom that had brought us all to this moment. "I promise to see you fully," Daniel vowed to Emily. Not as an extension of myself or a solution to my problems, but as your own complete person. At the reception, I found myself approached by a distinguished gentleman who introduced himself as Emily's father. "Mrs. Parker," he said warmly, "I've heard so much about you from both Emily and Daniel. Your son speaks of you with such admiration." "Please call me Helen," I replied. "And I'm equally impressed with the remarkable woman you raised." "They're good for each other," he observed, watching the newlyweds greet their guests. "Balanced." "Yes," I agreed. "That's exactly right." Later, during the traditional mother-son dance, Daniel led me onto the floor with graceful confidence. "Happy?" I asked as we moved to the gentle music. "Beyond words," he replied. "You know, I was thinking about Amanda earlier." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Really? Today of all days?" He nodded thoughtfully. "I realized something. In her own twisted way, she gave me the greatest gift possible. If she hadn't pushed me to that breaking point, if she hadn't humiliated you that day, I might never have found the strength to change. I might still be that dependent, immature man taking advantage of your generosity." "Perhaps," I allowed. "But I prefer to think that you had that strength inside you all along. It just needed the right catalyst to emerge." The music continued, and Daniel glanced over to where Emily was dancing with her father. "She sees me clearly," he said softly. "All of me, the good and the bad, the strong and the weak, and she loves me anyway." "That's what real love looks like," I agreed. "Not the fantasy Amanda sold you, but the authentic connection you've built with Emily." As the dance ended, Daniel embraced me tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." The rest of the reception passed in a blur of joy and celebration. When it was time for the newlyweds to depart for their honeymoon, guests gathered to shower them with flower petals. Daniel sought me out one last time, pressing something into my hand. "What's this?" I asked, looking down at a small key. "To our house," he explained. "Emily and I want you to know you're always welcome, not as a guest, but as family. No one will ever tell you to leave again." I closed my fingers around the key, its symbolic weight far greater than its physical presence. "I'll treasure this," I promised, "but you know I'll always call before coming over." He laughed, a sound free from the insecurity that had plagued him for so long. "I'd expect nothing less from Helen Parker, woman of principle." As I watched their car disappear down the driveway, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought us here. 2 years ago, Amanda Brooks had screamed at me to get out of what she thought was her house, never imagining that her cruelty would set in motion a transformation that would ultimately lead to this day of joy and authentic connection. I sat on my stone bench as the other guests began to depart, feeling the pleasant weight of the key in my palm and the warmth of the afternoon sun on my face. At 75, I had discovered that life's most difficult moments often serve as doorways to its greatest gifts, if only we have the courage to walk through them. Amanda had severely underestimated the power of a determined older woman. She had mistaken age for weakness, wisdom for interference, and maternal love for control. Her greatest miscalculation, however, had been believing she could drive me away from what was rightfully mine. Not just a house, but my relationship with my son. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.